I first entertained the idea of a grand celebration the morning the calendar flipped to May. I'd brewed my coffee, French press, dark roast, and carried it out to the porch swing, cradling the warm mug as I watched the sun coax dew from the rose petals. Retirement, I reminded myself, was finally behind me. 65 years felt momentous, a threshold into something both new and beautifully familiar. And yet, as I stared at the blossoms Margaret and I had planted 50 years ago, I realized that no milestone was complete without the laughter and voices of loved ones gathered around our farmhouse. With its weathered brick facade and wide, welcoming eaves, had been in my family since my grandfather's time. I could still hear him humming a polka tune as he hung the wind chimes on that very porch. In the years since Margaret passed, the house had become quieter, too quiet, but every corner held a memory I couldn't bear to let fade. And so, I decided to invite everyone back, my son Michael and his new wife Sarah, my daughter Jane and her husband Tom, cousins I'd lost touch with, neighbors who'd always been more like family. That afternoon, I set to work at my polished oak desk in the study. I fetched invitations of heavy cream cardstock edged in gold leaf, the same kind we'd used for our 50th wedding anniversary. With slow, steady strokes of black ink, I penned each name in calligraphy, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Reynolds, Jane and Tom Bennett, Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher, the Thompson family, and so on. With each flourish, I felt a swell of anticipation, memories of birthday parties past, of candles blown out to cheers, of the way Margaret's eyes would sparkle as she watched our children unwrap gifts. By the time I dipped my quill to sign off. June 30th, 3 p.m., backyard barbecue and reception, the sun had slipped to the rooftops. I stacked the envelopes, bundled them with ribbon, and set them aside for mailing the next morning. Then, with a sigh of satisfaction, I poured myself a second cup of coffee and closed my eyes, imagining the day to come and the weeks that followed. I fell into planning like a second childhood. Each morning, I'd rise at dawn to review recipes I'd clipped from magazines, smoked ribs with tangy mustard glaze, grilled portobello burgers for vegetarian friends, potato salad spiked with fresh dill from my garden. I reconnoitered the toolbox in the garage, checking the grill's propane tank, oiling its hinges, testing the rotisserie. I strung tiny paper lanterns from the branches of the old maple tree, their pastel hues dancing in the breeze like ghostly fireflies. On weekends, I visited the flower market in town. The vendor, Mrs. Langley, greeted me with a knowing smile. "Birthday party?" she'd ask, handing me bundles of daisies and hydrangeas. I'd pay her in cash, secretly proud at the length of my shopping list, 3 dozen mason jars for arrangements, 4 feet of burlap for table runners, citronella candles to ward off mosquitoes. Every detail mattered. Margaret had taught me that hospitality was an art, and I intended to master it. I also crafted a playlist of jazz standards, Ella Fitzgerald's Velvet Alto, Louis Armstrong's gravelly trumpet, the sultry sax of Stan Getz, for background ambience. I tested speakers under the porch and adjusted the volume so conversations could flow over the music, rather than be drowned by it. At night, I practiced the opening bars of My Funny Valentine on my saxophone in the living room, the notes reverberating off the high ceilings, reminding me how long it had been since I'd played in public. In the midst of this fervor, I kept reaching for my phone. I texted Michael, "Hope you can make it June 30th, would love to see you and Sarah." A polite thumbs-up emoji came back. I emailed Jane, "You'll stay for cake, right?" Her quick response assured me she'd come but might have to duck out early for Tom's work. I called the Fletchers and the Thompsons. "We'll be there," they said, cheerfully. I hung up smiling each time, though a small knot of worry nagged at me, my children's work obligations, weddings of friends, summer camps for grandchildren. Life was busy, and sometimes busy crowded out the things that mattered most, yet as the calendar pages flipped from May to June, my hope only grew. I bought extra folding chairs and a new cooler for drinks. I agonized over the design of the cake, chocolate stout with layers of espresso buttercream, and practiced piping medallions onto a dummy round of styrofoam. My daughter-in-law Sarah and I had never been close, our interactions limited to holiday gatherings and awkward handshakes, but I imagined she would delight in the garden's perennials and perhaps share her own stories of family traditions. Between Planning sessions, I took long walks through the orchard behind the house, remembering how Margaret would accompany me, her hand in mine, humming an old folk tune. I could still smell her perfume, a soft lavender musk, lingering among the apple blossoms. Sometimes I spoke aloud to her, "Margaret, if only you could see this." I felt foolish, but the words strengthened me, as if she were still beside me, her smile urging me forward. When June 15th arrived, I realized I had 2 weeks to tie every loose end. I ordered extra firewood for the outdoor fireplace in case the evening turned chilly. I prepped the vegetable garden for the salad greens I'd harvest that morning. I inspected the guest book, a leather-bound journal where each visitor could leave a note, and adorned it with a pressed rose from the front yard. And I made a special playlist for children, old gospel tunes to get the little ones dancing barefoot. On the lawn. On June 20th, the RSVPs slowed to a trickle. Jane confirmed she'd stop by at 3:30 but had a dinner rehearsal at 6. Michael's response, when it came, was more cautious. "Conference schedule is intense. I can't make promises, but I'll try." I paused, pen in hand. Try. The word hovered in the air, neither reassurance nor refusal. I set the invitation aside and wandered back to the porch, sipping lemonade as a gentle breeze stirred the maple leaves. So I reminded myself that hope is not blind faith, it is belief shaped by action. I'd done everything within my power to make the day special. I swept the front walk, cleaned the gutters, repainted the wrought iron bench near the pond. What remained was out of my hands. Family would come if they could. And if they didn't, I would still have crafted a day worthy of celebration. But on the eve of June 29th, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of port, reviewing my to-do list one final time. Tomorrow, I would rise before dawn, fire up the grill, and lay out everything just so. Candles in the lanterns. Plates stacked by the buffet. Napkins folded into perfect squares. I'd play a cheerful tune on the saxophone as the first guest arrived, and I could almost see them stepping from their cars, arms laden with dishes, kids chasing each other around the birdbath. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine it, the clink of ice in glasses, the murmur of conversation, my children's laughter mingling with the music. I saw Margaret's face, radiant in the lantern light, applauding as I dedicated a final jazz solo to our life together. And I believed, truly believed, that tomorrow would be one of the happiest days of my life. With that thought, I placed the empty glass on the hearth, smoothed my shirt, and turned out the lights. The farmhouse was silent, but in my heart, the party had already begun. The morning sun rose without ceremony on June 30th, casting slender beams of light across the dewy lawn. I awoke before dawn with both anticipation and a quiet tremor in my chest, as though my heart were an overexcited child. I crept downstairs in socks to avoid waking the house. No one needed to know how restless I'd been, and flicked on the kitchen lights. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of sparrows were my only companions. I started with coffee, pouring dark roast into my favorite blue mug. Steam curled above it in lazy tendrils, carrying the rich aroma through the room. By 6:30, I was kneading dough for breakfast cinnamon rolls, humming an old tune Margaret used to whistle on Sunday mornings. The rolling pin pressed into the flour-dusted surface as memories swirled, sticky fingers, flour in her hair, our children giggling as they waited for the first warm bite. I paused, pressing my palm to the window pane, willing myself to believe those days were still within reach. By 8, the scent of cinnamon perfumed the house. I placed the golden rolls on a doily-lined platter, then stepped out to inspect the decorations. The string lights I'd hung the night before looked perfect, tiny bulbs suspended like watchful fireflies among the maple leaves. The lanterns, pastel against the emerald canopy, would glow like lantern-lit pearls when dusk fell. I tested the old grill, its belly still warm from a week of careful maintenance, and arranged chairs in gentle semicircles around the main table. Where the lace tablecloth waited, crisp and white to AT10, I walked the perimeter of the yard, plucking stray weeds near the flower beds, peonies, daisies, lavender, and added a few final blossoms to the mason jar vases. A gentle breeze stirred the hydrangeas I'd ordered from Mrs. Langley. I tucked a ribbon around each jar in a neat bow. Already, the backyard looked like a scene from memory rather than reality. When the church bell in town tolled noon, I set out platters of cold cuts, marinated olives, and spinach dip crafted from a family recipe passed down by Margaret's mother. I filled the ice chests with bottled water, lemonade, and ginger ale, then wiped my palms on a clean towel, stepping back to admire my handiwork. My phone sat on the side table, its screen dark. I imagined it lighting up with messages, "On our way. See you soon." Instead, it remained still at 1 p.m. My grandson's bicycle, a bright red tricycle I'd tuned up just for him, stood unattended by the patio. I had envisioned his chubby hands gripping the handlebars, his laughter echoing as he circled the lawn. My heart stuttered, but I turned away, telling myself to save the doubt. After all, cars could be delayed, highways might be jammed. There was still time to by 2 o'clock, the jazz playlist began. Ella's sultry voice floated over the speakers, and I imagined heads turning as guests stepped through the gate. But when I stepped out to greet them, the lane was empty. No cars. No waving arms. No small feet padding across the grass. I paced the length of the driveway with my hands clasped behind my back, heart thumping under my clean, white shirt at 2:30. I tried calling Michael's mobile. Straight to voicemail. I called Jane's number next, silent. My chest tightened and I could taste the bitterness of disappointment, like stale coffee left out too long. I dialed the Fletchers and raised the phone to my ear, only to hear its lonely ring, unanswered. Each silent line felt like a silent agreement. I wasn't worth interrupting their plans at 3 p.m. sharp, my appointed party hour. I stepped outside in my festive bow tie and crisp slacks. The radio host announced a jazz standard, then paused, as though searching for guests. The stream of music continued, oblivious to the empty yard. The folding chairs I'd arranged in neat rows faced no audience. The buffet table laden with food sat like an altar with no worshippers. I perched on the edge of a chair, trying to will my face into a smile. I lifted a paper plate, selected a piece of smoked rib, and bit into it. The sweet tang of barbecue sauce hit my tongue, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and pretended Margaret sat across from me, offering me her own helping. But when I opened them, the table was lonely, and my hands shook as I set the plate down. The overhead sky began to haze in the early afternoon heat, and the lantern swayed slightly though there was no wind. My throat felt parched. I poured myself a glass of lemonade, watching the ice clink against the glass like a metronome counting the seconds between hope and reality. A cricket chirped in the distance. I listened, wondering if even the insects had turned away on my special day. At 3:15, I sank onto the porch swing, its old chains creaking under my weight. I rested my head against the back of the bench and let the silence wash over me. The empty chairs, the unclaimed plates, the barren driveway, they pressed in like a weight around my shoulders. I touched the ribbon on a vase, still perfectly tied, and realized that perfection felt hollow without companionship, yet in that hollow, I found something unexpected, clarity. I saw the party not as a failure, but as a moment revealed. As I rocked gently, the world narrowed to sunlit leaves and the steady drone of the jazz record spinning unseen inside. I let myself cry then, small, shuddering tears that fell onto my lap, and I did not bother to wipe them away, because in the depth of that solitude, I understood a simple truth: hope can lead us to prepare a feast, but love is what brings people to the table. And though the chairs remained empty now, I vowed to learn why, and, if necessary, to fill them again another day. The afternoon sun slanted low through the maple branches, painting the empty yard in stripes of amber and shadow. When I finally rose from the porch swing, my joints protested with the ache of too many years, and too many unspoken regrets. I stood slowly, folding my hands behind my back, and wandered toward the house as if drawn by an invisible thread of memory. Inside, the house felt cavernous. Every surface, as walls, floors, cupboards, bore witness to decades of laughter and sorrow. I set my glass of lukewarm lemonade on the kitchen counter and traced a finger along the chipped blue enamel where Margaret once rested her elbow. The scent of barbecue sauce still lingered in the air, ghostly and sweet, mingling with the faint perfume of lavender that clung to the curtains. It was as though the day of celebration had happened, but everyone else had stepped out of the photograph. I moved into the living room, heart tightening as I passed the piano where our daughter Jane had once practiced scales, her small fingers stumbling over middle C until she got it perfectly. The piano bench was pushed neatly under the glossy lid and used for months, perhaps years. On its music rack, a sheet of Somewhere Over the Rainbow still fluttered gently in the breeze from the open window. I closed the window, careful not to jostle the pages, and sank into the armchair, its upholstery worn at the armrests from countless evenings spent reading to grandchildren. I picked up the framed photograph on the side table, Margaret in her sun hat, riding a bicycle down the country lane, her skirt billowing like a flag. I remembered that day, how she convinced me to come along, how the day had felt endless and bright and full of promise. I pressed my palm to the glass, fogging it with warmth. If only time were as pliable as metal rimmed in glass, if only we could rewind and relive those moments. But life is mercilessly linear. Yesterday dissolves into today in a heartbeat, and tomorrow remains clutched in a veil of mist. Stirred by a sudden impulse, I rose and padded down the hallway to our bedroom. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the bed we'd shared for 40 years. The quilt Margaret had sewn lay folded at the foot, its patchwork of floral fabric muted in the afternoon light. I ran my hand over the stitches, following each seam as though reading a map of our life together. There, where the blue and rose prints met, Margaret had embroidered our initials with a tiny heart. I bent closer, smiling through tears as if she might still be beside me correcting my handiwork. My gaze shifted to the bedside table where an open journal awaited. It was mine, filled with my scrawled accounts of daily life since her passing. July 5th, bought new light bulbs for the porch. July 6th, misplaced the car keys again. July 7th, rain washed away half the garden. The entries grew sparse. Toward the end, as if inspiration had dried up like a stream in drought, I lifted the journal and flipped it to a blank page, my pen hesitating at the top. What would I write now? June 30th, celebration failed, house was empty, heart remembers. I closed the journal gently and carried it back to the living room, setting it beside the photograph of Margaret on her bicycle. Then I walked into the study, where the ornate oak desk still bore the ribbon stack of invitations. The paper lay stern and matter-of-fact, almost mocking in its crisp perfection. I opened the top envelope, Michael and Sarah Reynolds, and touched the gold trim on the cardstock. How carefully I'd addressed each one, how much faith I'd pinned on the names written there. My eyes fell on the empty guest book by the mantel. I picked it up, its leather cover soft and cool, and turned to the first page. Blank. I thumbed through the crisp pages, each one blank, waiting for names and messages that never came. A lump rose in my throat so heavy I had to set the book down. I thought of all the empty pages in my life, anniversaries, holidays, birthdays, on which I'd written nothing but a date and an unanswered question: where were you? I sank to the floor beside the fireplace, the journal in my lap and the guest book at my side. I let my memories wash over me in a slow, aching tide. I saw Margaret's gentle scolding when I forgot to pick up milk on my way home. I heard Jane's triumphant laugh when she caught her first fish at summer camp. I felt the warmth of Michael's arms around me when he'd come home from college, homesick and unsure. Those moments felt distant now, like distant constellations in a starless sky, brilliant, but unreachable. In the hush, the house seemed to breathe. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with deliberate precision, 1, 2, 3, a steady reminder that time never stops. I wondered how many more ticks I had left before my own hourglass ran out. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Terrifying because I'd spent too many days preparing for celebrations that never materialized. Comforting because the tick of life itself meant I had time yet to redefine what celebration could be. I laid my head against the hearthstone, where residual warmth from the fireplace lingered. Closed my eyes, I let the patter of that grandfather clock lull me back into memory. I saw the countless gatherings that had once filled this house: weddings, christenings, Thanksgiving feasts. And I realized that every one of them, even the most joyous, had harbored its share of empty chairs, people who couldn't come, plans that fell through, unexpected departures that cast shadows across the table. I drew in a slow breath and sat up. The house around me was still, but the world beyond the windows brimmed with possibility. Perhaps family could be more than those who shared my blood. Perhaps friends, neighbors, even strangers drawn together by circumstance could fill the spaces at my table. Perhaps the essence of family belonged not to those who said, "I will be there," but to those who said, "I'm here now." With deliberate calm, I rose to my feet, brushing dust from my trousers. I returned to the kitchen and washed the empty plates, slowly and methodically, as though washing away the residue of my disappointment. I stacked them neatly, ready for another day. Then I gathered the journal, the guest book, and the photograph of Margaret, and carried them upstairs to place on my writing desk. I sat before the old manual typewriter, its keys still responsive, and replaced the ribbon with a fresh one I'd kept in the drawer. I slipped in a sheet of paper and let the carriage click into position. My fingers hovered above the keys as the last rays of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, and I typed, Chapter 3, Memories in Silence in the Quiet Aftermath of Hope. Unmet, I discovered that no celebration can be measured by the number of chairs filled, but by the depth of what remains in the heart. I paused, reading the words as though hearing them for the first time. Then I hit the carriage return and began to type again, not invitations this time, but the story of what had happened when family failed to appear, and how love, memory, and unexpected kindness could still fill the spaces left behind. And so, in the hush of that old farmhouse, I wrote my truth into being, certain that even silence has its own music, and that, one way or another, someone would one day listen. The late afternoon light softened the edges of the world as I sat alone at the patio table, the last ember of hope flickering in my chest. I'd almost convinced myself that the universe had forgotten my birthday, that my family's absence was the final verdict on my worth. With heavy hands, I poured the remaining lemonade into a tall glass and stared at the condensation beating on its surface. A sudden crunch of gravel halted my thoughts. My heart lurched as I glanced toward the driveway, expecting, hoping, to see my son's car rounding the bend. Instead, a sleek charcoal sedan coasted to a stop beneath the maple canopy. For a moment, I thought my eyes deceived me. Then the passenger door opened, and I recognized her silhouette, Sarah. Michael's wife, the daughter-in-law I hardly knew beyond holiday small talk and perfunctory smiles. I rose unsteadily, smoothing my shirt as she stepped onto the lawn. She carried a bouquet of wild daisies, my favorite, that bobbed in time with her measured footsteps. I remembered placing those same blossoms in mason jars just hours ago, but these were fresh, their petals tight and hopeful. "Happy birthday, George," she said softly, voice trembling with apology and something like relief. "Sarah," the single word caught in my throat. I reached out, and she hesitated for only a heartbeat before giving me a small, grateful smile and laying the bouquet on the table. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she murmured. "Michael's conference ran over. There was no way he could have gotten back in time." She wiped a strand of hair from her face, and for the first time I saw the exhaustion etched in her eyes, the late nights preparing presentations, the guilt of leaving her in-laws' patriarch alone on an important day. In that instant, her apology became more than polite words, it was a bridge across the silence that had swallowed my afternoon. I gestured toward the empty chairs, the untouched table. "It's been quiet today." Her eyes flickered toward the spread of food, the silent jazz tinkling from the speakers. "I know. I was so worried when I called and Michael's phone went straight to voicemail. I felt terrible. But I couldn't bear the thought of you spending your birthday alone." She paused, then reached into her purse and drew out a small, well-worn envelope. I took it with trembling fingers and saw my name penned in Michael's flowing script. With a gentle nod, I opened it to find a photograph tucked inside, a young Margaret, laughing in the dappled shade of the maple tree, cradling me as a newborn in her arms. My chest tightened at the sight of her bright eyes and the way the sunlight caught her auburn hair. "She found this when we were unpacking in Boston," Sarah said. "I know how much she meant to you. I thought you'd like to have it back." Tears sprung unbidden to my eyes. I placed the photo on the table between us and reached for Sarah's hand. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with gratitude. "This means more than you know." She gathered 2 chairs and sat beside me. I wanted to stay for the whole party, she said, but I didn't want to overstay if you preferred to be alone. Her honesty was a balm to my wounded pride. I'd like you to stay, I admitted. I'd like that very much. Sarah smiled, genuine, radiant, like sunshine breaking through clouds. She took a seat, and together we lit the candles and the lanterns, their soft glow weaving warmth into the gathering dusk. She helped me arrange the daisies in their mason jars and adjusted the ribbon so it sat at a perfect bow. As we worked, she told me about her own childhood birthdays, how her mother would bake lemon tarts and how her younger brother had once hidden her special present until she cried in frustration. I shared memories of Margaret leading a conga line at our 50th wedding anniversary, of my daughter Jane discovering her first gray hair and running into the arms of her college roommate. The conversation deepened, shifting effortlessly from small talk to honest confession. Sarah revealed the loneliness she'd felt since moving away from her hometown, the pressure of fitting into a new family while carving out her own identity. I confessed how frightened I'd been, these past months, of losing the people I loved as life's responsibilities pulled them farther away. In that soft, intimate space, the empty chairs faded from view. It felt as though decades of familial distance dissolved with each shared laugh and gentle silence. When the candles flickered low, Sarah surprised me again. She stood and pulled a small portable speaker from her bag, placing it beside the record player. I thought we could add something new, she said. A song you don't have on vinyl. She tapped her phone, and the opening chords of Miles Davis's Blue in Green drifted through the yard. It was my favorite, one Margaret and I had danced to in our living room one late autumn evening, full of wine and whispered promises. Without hesitation, Sarah extended her hand. May I have this dance? I took her hand, and we slow-stepped across the lawn, the grass cooled beneath our shoes. The empty plates and silent buffet table receded, replaced by the lingering notes of the trumpet and the quiet joy of a daughter-in-law's kindness. For one suspended moment, I felt Margaret's presence in the soft brush of wind through the trees and the gentle clasp of Sarah's hand in mine. When the track ended, we stood still, breathing in the shared cadence of loss, hope, and renewal. Sarah squeezed my hand. You're not alone, George, she said. You have family, old and new, to share these moments. I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice steady with the promise of tomorrow. And for reminding me that family is who shows up, even when it's hardest. As we carried the leftover plates back to the kitchen, I realized that today's party had become something far more meaningful than I'd ever planned. It wasn't the feast or the guests listed on an invitation, it was the unexpected act of love that filled the yard with light long after the candles burned down. And in that golden hour, beneath the lantern-lit canopy, I understood that my family's story was still unfolding, and that new chapters, written with kindness and care, lay waiting for us all. The lanterns had burned low, their pastel paper shells dulled by the creeping night, and the yard was now half-lit by the blush of dusk. We'd washed the last of the plates inside and brought a tray of lemon-infused herbal tea onto the porch. The air was heavy with humid warmth, and the crickets chirped in a staccato chorus beyond the garden fence. Sarah nestled into one of the folding chairs, her posture tentative, as if weighing whether to speak. I sat across from her, the wooden floor cool beneath my bare feet, my heart beating in guarded anticipation. I haven't told anyone this, she began, her voice low, almost swallowed by the night. She folded her hands around the teacup, her knuckles paling. But 2 months ago, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Stage 4. Her words landed between us like a winter chill. I'd suspected she'd been under stress, her eyes had often seemed distant, preoccupied, but I'd never imagined something so grave. I didn't want to burden Michael, she said, her gaze dropping to the rim of her cup. He's been in the middle of that big project at work for months. His promotion depends on it. And when I visited home, I split my time between the hospital and the house, running errands, talking to doctors, trying to make sense of it. I leaned forward slowly. How is she now? She's fighting, Sarah said, her voice cracking with fierce determination. Chemo, radiation, you name it. But her prognosis is uncertain. Some days are good when she laughs over old family albums. Other days, she's so weak she can't even lift a spoon. One of the old brass wind chimes tinkled in the still air, startling us both. I felt a pang of sympathy, a familiar ache for family members I'd watched fade away. I didn't tell you, Sarah continued, because I didn't know how. And I hated the thought of disappointing you, of arriving here with sad news instead of party favors. Tears filled her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. There's nothing to forgive, I said softly. I squeezed her hand. You've done what you thought best for your family, both yours and Michael's. She exhaled a shaky laugh. That sounds like something you'd say to Michael, when he's torn between two obligations. I smiled at her candor. He's a good man, your husband. He cares deeply about both of you. Sarah nodded, pressing her forehead against my hand for a moment. I was scared you'd think I didn't care about you either. That I'd let you down twice, first by not being here sooner, then by keeping this from you. I shook my head. Family isn't measured by perfect timing or flawless plans. It's measured by love, by being there when it matters most, even if you arrive late. She raised her head, and in her eyes I saw both relief and lingering sorrow. There's more, she whispered. My stepfather, he's never really accepted me. My mother remarried after Dad died, and my stepdad treats me like an intruder. He refuses to let me help with medical bills or make decisions. He says he's protecting her, but I know he just doesn't want me there. I felt my jaw tighten. That must be so painful, for both of you. Sarah swallowed. It is. I feel torn. I want to be by her side, but I'm so angry at him that every visit feels like walking through a minefield. She took a tremulous sip of tea. I'm ashamed to say I've sometimes begged Michael to let me miss family dinners just so I can avoid the tension. Tension. The word echoed inside me. I'd hosted countless dinners where unspoken grudges simmered under the tablecloth, polite conversation papering over deep divides. I'd always hoped weddings or reunions would heal old wounds, but they rarely did. I understand more than you know, I said. When Margaret and I first married, my father disapproved of our choice of home. He thought the farm was too far from town, that I was turning my back on opportunity. We didn't speak for 6 months. I paused, swallowing a lump of memory. It took my mother's illness to bring us back together. Sarah's hand tightened on mine. You've been through so much. I nodded, eyes unfocused on the glowing embers of the small lanterns. And yet here you are, standing in my yard, sharing this with me. That takes courage. She looked at me then, vulnerability and determination warring in her face. There's one more reason I didn't talk sooner, she admitted. Hesitation flickered in her eyes, then she drew a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Time stopped. The chirping crickets slowed, the soft hum of the old farmhouse seemed to halt mid-echo, and my heart thundered in my chest. Pregnant? I repeated, disbelieving. Sarah nodded, a shy, tentative smile tugging at her lips. Yes. About 3 months. Michael wanted to tell you together, but with everything, it was complicated. Tears sprang to my eyes, tears of astonishment, joy, and relief. A grandchild, I whispered, voice trembling. We're going to have a grandchild. She laughed, bright and tearful, covering her face with her hands. I was so afraid. You'd be upset. My health, my mother's health. I thought you'd see me as unstable. I stood and reached for her, pulling her into an embrace. Her head rested against my chest as I whispered into her hair, Sarah, you've given me the greatest gift. All I ever wanted was family, and this is beyond anything I could have hoped for. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world outside fading into a soft blur. When we finally pulled away, I guided her to the edge of the porch, where I'd stashed my old saxophone. Play something for our grandchild, I said with a grin. A lullaby. Her eyes widened. You'd let me? Tonight, anything, I replied, handing her the instrument. She lifted it cautiously, her fingers unfamiliar with its keys. I coached her gently, placing her hands where they needed to be. Then, with a breath, she coaxed a soft, wavering note into the night. It quivered, and then steadied. I recognized the melody instantly, My Funny Valentine. The opening phrase drifted upward, tender and raw, carrying our new secret into the starlit sky. As the notes faded, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small envelope Michael had sent when he realized he couldn't make it. Inside was a short video message, Michael in his hotel room, camera shaking slightly, eyes full of regret. "Dad," he said, voice thick, "I'm so sorry. Work let me down at the last minute, but I love you. Sarah told me about everything, Mom's health, the baby. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Together, we watched the message glow on my phone screen, Michael's earnest face bridging the miles. He ended with a wink, "Happy birthday, Dad. See you soon." Sarah turned off the phone and wiped a tear from my cheek. "He loves you," she said simply. Yet I clasped her hand and felt warmth flood back into the night. "Yes," I whispered. "He does. And so do you." We lingered on the porch until the lanterns flickered out completely, leaving only the silver light of the moon to illumine the garden. In the quiet aftermath of revelations, I realized my yard had been empty only in body. In spirit, it had been brimming with love, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. Today, as Sarah finally rose to leave, cradling the small swell of her belly like a cherished secret, I hugged her once more. "Thank you," I said. "For everything." She smiled, her silhouette soft against the farmhouse glow. "We're family, George. Midnight or noon, I'll be here." And in that simple vow, I felt the past, present, and future converge. A daughter-in-law's secret had become the greatest gift of all. The morning after my 65th birthday dawned in soft pastels, rose gold light spilled across the fields, dew beating on the roses like tiny lanterns. I woke before sunrise, the hush of the farmhouse somehow gentler than the previous days. Silence. In the kitchen, the kettle's whistle seemed to herald something new, not simply another morning. I made a pot of coffee and carried it onto the porch, where the wooden swing still bore the imprint of last night's conversation with Sarah. I cradled my mug and watched the world wake up, a lone robin hopping across the lawn, the distant hum of a tractor rolling in to tend its rows, and the maple's leaves stirring in the gentle breeze. For the first time in days, I felt as though I were part of something larger than my own disappointment. Inside, I found an email from Michael with the subject line, "Lunch, Dad?" My heart leapt. He wrote, "Hey, Dad, I'm in town next Wednesday. Just you and me, lunch at that little bistro you love? I owe you a proper celebration." Under it, Sarah had added, "P.S. I'll be there, too, plus one more, if you don't mind." I reread the message 3 times before setting my mug down and smiling. A proper celebration indeed. Over the next few days, I busied myself, but this time, not with elaborate plans for a grand party, but with small gestures of reconnection. I pruned the rose bushes, cutting away dead wood so new shoots could flourish. I wrote postcards to old friends, neighbors from decades past, inviting them for afternoon tea in late July. I called Jane and spoke to her for a full hour, listening to every nuance of her life in Albany and apologizing for not reaching out sooner. When she laughed at my old-fashioned idioms, I felt my spirit lightened. On Monday, Sarah texted that she'd visited the garden early, gathering fresh basil and thyme for pizza night. She asked if could I spare some eggs from the chicken coop. When I handed her a dozen that afternoon, I noticed her belly fuller, her smile broader. She lingered at the gate, brushing away a swath of hair. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we could host a small dinner here one night. Just close family, Michael, you, me, and the baby. No pressure, no RSVPs, just us, here and now." I nodded, touched by her thoughtfulness. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that. Very much." Wednesday arrived with a clear sky. At noon, Michael's familiar laugh echoed down the driveway. He stepped from his rental car, briefcase in hand, but that briefcase seemed lighter than usual, his shoulders weren't burdened. by tight deadlines. He enveloped me in a hug that felt like coming home to Dad, he said, voice thick. I'm sorry again, not just for missing your party, but for all the times I let work get in the way. From now on, I promise, I'll make time. I patted his back. You're here now. That's what counts. We lunched at the bistro overlooking the river, the same table where I'd introduced him to his first espresso, and where, years later, he'd told me he was engaged to Sarah. We toasted my birthday with iced tea. Then shared a chocolate tart that was almost too sweet to taste. Halfway through our meal, Sarah arrived, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She paused at our table, surprised smiles on both our faces. Michael squeezed her hand, and she slid into the seat next to me. From beneath her arm, she produced a small, hand-painted card. On its cover, a watercolor of a stork in flight. Inside, in delicate script, it read, "We can't wait to meet you, Grandpa." I closed my eyes and felt a tear slip down my cheek. When I looked at them again, Sarah's and Michael's faces glowed with quiet joy. Back at the farmhouse that evening, we sat around the kitchen table, wood polished by generations of meals, eating Sarah's homemade pizza topped with basil fresh from the garden. The baby kicked gently, a soft reminder that life moves forward even as we look back. I told them stories of my own childhood birthdays, of chocolate sundaes at the ice cream parlor, of paper crowns at school, of the day Margaret surprised me with a saxophone lesson. They listened, enthralled, as though each anecdote were a precious heirloom. Michael laughed when I recounted my disastrous attempt at candle blowing in second grade. Sarah wiped tears when I spoke of Margaret's final birthday, when I'd played My Funny Valentine on that very saxophone. After dinner, Michael washed dishes while Sarah and I sat on the back steps, watching fireflies flicker in the rose bushes. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered, "for opening your heart." I kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for coming," I replied. "And for teaching me that family is built one moment at a time." In the days that followed, I noticed changes in how I saw this home. The farmhouse was no longer a shrine to memories past, but a stage for new ones. The first tentative kicks caught through Sarah's dress, Martha the neighbor's surprise visit bearing berry pie, and the soft lullaby I practiced each evening. For the grandchild I had yet to meet on July 10th, my birthday proper, I placed a single candle on a small slice of leftover cake. Sarah and Michael joined me on the porch, arms around each other. I closed my eyes, made a wish not for fame or fortune, but for simple gifts, laughter filling these rooms, children's footsteps in the hallway, love that endures. When I opened my eyes, Sarah and Michael were holding hands, their faces soft with contentment. I realized then that renewal is not a fleeting spark, but a steady flame, the promise that no matter how many empty chairs we've known, there will always be new guests to welcome, new laughter to hear, and new stories to tell. And as the candle flickered in the warm summer breeze, I understood that my 65th year had already become the richest chapter of my life, because it reminded me that family, old and new, is forged in kindness, resilience, and the courage to show up, even when it's hardest.